people on this podcast. We've had Grant Cardone, Brad Lee, Anthony Trucks, Coach Michael Burt. Nobody has a cooler beard than my guy right here. Neal, what's going on, my friend?
Hey, brother. Appreciate you doing this. This is fantastic. Like I said before this, I'm trying to hone in on only doing podcasts with certain people. And now I'm really focusing in on doing it with people that are like-minded. So I appreciate you taking the time for this.
I appreciate that. Hey, Neal, take a minute and tell our audience a little bit about where you are and what you've got going on right now.
Yeah, so this beautiful residence that I have here is in Cold Spring, New York. After exiting from a big company right before the pandemic happened, I moved here, and I've been really just sat with myself for a minute and thought, how do I start to really give back and serve, the communities that I work with? And the money will just come. And so I really took stock on that. And so I've now started a foundation with a brand called Press Forward. We're building out branded materials, hoodies, sweatshirts, hats, a whole bunch of different stuff. And then for every single piece of material that's bought, we donate a large portion of it back to mental health awareness programs, veterans in transition, which is a huge one for me as a veteran. You're a veteran too. Mm-hmm. So like that rings home with us deeply. Mm-hmm. And it's great. I'm a father of daughters, and I love watching all the women's empowerment stuff that's going on. But I think it's important that we don't leave the men behind. And so, I support women's empowerment initiatives, but also want to be able to help our fellow brothers as they kind of figure out where they fit into that mix in today's world.
Yeah, it's a difficult transition. I was in the Air Force, so mine was more technical computer operations. It was a little bit different transition, but you served several times overseas, combat in the Marine Corps. Talk about that transition, the mindset piece of it, coming back from a military background. Just even going to civilian life from the Air Force was different. But coming back from some of the places you were deployed to, talk about that mindset and kind of what it took for you to get used to going back into civilian life.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I've done a lot of research over the past dozen or so years that I've been focused on this. And I'm a technical guy, did all the cool startup things, worked in big corporate companies, and really still struggled with managing my identity a little bit for a long time. And there's a lot of research out there that shows that Olympians, NFL players especially, actors, and military service members all share this common thread. And what this common thread is that for a period of time in your life, you are told every single day you are the best that is possible. Mm-hmm. Right? Olympians are world champions. Actors, this is why childhood actors and actresses struggle so much. You are thrust in front of the line for you doing something amazing. And then when that finishes up, you just kind of pack up your stuff and go home. Mm. Right? And so it's like you have this ultimate support system for as long as you are excelling at the thing you're really good at. And, in the US military, when you take that oath, when you step on those footprints and you make a commitment to serve in some capacity, the only commitment that the government makes back to you is that if you are physically strong enough, mentally strong enough, you will have an opportunity to serve. But when you're done, you just kind of go home.
Right.
And, what's really evolved for me is as somebody who came out with that and struggled with identity, went into the corporate world, threw on a suit and tie, I call it traded in uniforms, still struggled with it, leaped out into the startup space. I used to always have this story in my head, and my mindset was always I'm going to leverage being a military veteran to get a job or to get recognition. And I would always be like, hi, my name is Neal Conlon, Marine Corps veteran, blah, 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 blah. And you have all these military brands that get built out, which is great, mm-hmm. right? We have got mm-hmm. all these brands that get built around this idea. But the first time that I got a job, or the first time that somebody hired me for work, and I wasn't getting hired because of my military background, I wrote a blog about it. It's called The First Time I Didn't Have to Say I Was a Marine. it was such a powerful thing because I let go of so much to be like, I've got a different level of value of self-worth other than the fact that I served this country in a meaningful way. And that's a hard thing for people to let go of when you've served at that level of service.
Mhm. I love that you talked about Olympians, actors, and military, about how they're told that they're the best their entire lives. One of my favorite quotes. So Gladiator is like my favorite movie of all time, right? A Gladiator 1A and Remember the Titans 1B. Those are my two favorite. But in Gladiator, obviously it's Marcus Aurelius. And there's a book that I read that has a story in there that Marcus Aurelius, when he was alive, he had a man that followed him all day long, that his only job was to whisper in his ear and say, remember, you're only just a man.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, you're only just a man. Talk about that transition, because we were talking about earlier, and I want to jump into your ice bath stuff because that's just absolutely crazy to me. Like, so I've got, you talked about NFL veterans. So I've got several NFL friends, retired college game day guys that are really close friends of mine. I turned my ankle playing basketball. I had plantar fasciitis. A buddy of mine, Peerless Price, played in the NFL forever for the Falcons and for the Bills, played Tennessee and won that championship. And Peerless put his foot in ice. He had rolled his ankle. I was like, man, I got plantar fasciitis. He said, put your foot in the ice bucket. I put my foot in that thing for about 30 seconds. And I'm like, there ain't no way in the world I can do what you do. Because dude, I thought my foot was on fire. And that's what we talked about earlier. But talk about the mindset shift from being where you're told you're the best. And you are. Like you are the tip of the spear when it comes to the U.S. military. You're the best. Talk about that mindset shift for you, Neal. Not just the mindset shift of moving into the civilian life, but what you took from being the best to be able to be an entrepreneur and start up and build and scale and sell the company.
Yeah, no, I appreciate this question very much. The military is, and I was just talking to one of the clients that I coach about this. I'm coaching a gentleman right now who's been in the Marine Corps for 24 years, master sergeant, top of the food chain as far as the military goes. And he's about to take the uniform off and walk away from it. And going from the top of the food chain, for lack of better words, to the bottom of the food chain again, right? Talk about being the best of the best of the best, and then just going home. The military is amazing at disconnecting the head from the heart for obvious reasons, right? It's an opportunity to serve our government, purpose, mission, all that stuff. And what we lose in the military is our humbleness. And it's because for the type of work we do in the military, we need to kind of tuck that away in a closet for a little bit of while. And I will say that one of the biggest mindset shifts was me taking all these tactical leadership, resilience, situational awareness, EQ, IQ, all these things the military can really improve for you. And knowing that I can take a lot of them forward, but also learning how to eat my humble pie along the way. And it really takes you in the military that failure isn't an option, right? In football, failure isn't an option. In the Olympics, failure is not an option, right? In acting, even when you're acting and making millions of dollars, you act poorly, you're done. And really realizing that when you come out into life, realize that you can fail and you're not done, really was a humble pie for me, and really like set off this. It wasn't until I really ate like humble pie after humble pie after humble pie that I was like, wait a minute, I can actually do this. And like, I'll give you a quick example. When I got out of the military, I had a couple of jobs, stumbled around for a little bit. Then I got a job as a security guard in a building, right? Like the guy checking IDs going in and out of 135 East 57th Street, New York City. And it was the building that they put all of the post 9/11 companies, World Trade Center companies in. So you had everybody who was in the World Trade Center is now in this one building. You had this whole building full of basically PTSDers, right? That had been through something that they didn't sign up for. They weren't in the military. They didn't sign up for this. They were civilians. And for 6 months, I was a security guard at the front door, checking IDs, managing people, places, things. And I just got to a point where I was like, I'm just meant for something more than this. And I wrote up this really bad resume, typed it up, and walked floor to floor in the building, handing it out to the human resources person on every floor. And I get to this one floor, and the HR guy wasn't there, and some other guy walking by with a suit and tie on. And again, I had more years with a pack on my back than with a tie at that point. And this guy's walking by, and I was like, "Hey, buddy, hey!" And he stops and gives me this like grimace look, and I hand it to him. And he looks at it, he looks at me, he looks at it, he goes, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I'm looking for a job here. I'm the security guy downstairs, and the human resources guy isn't there. And can you give it to him?" And he looks at it, looks at me, looks at it, looks at me, and he goes, "Neal, I don't know what the fuck we're going to do with you, but you're hired." And what I didn't realize at the time was this was the global chief operating officer at Guggenheim Partners, one of the largest hedge funds on the planet. And I look back at that now, and it was like that little bit of push, that little bit of pushing forward, leaning in, whatever you want to call it, would set off this big, huge chain of events where I'd work at that company for a long time. I'd get interested in technical stuff. I'd start doing IT things. I'd end up being at Morgan Stanley, Cushman and Wakefield, leaping into startups. Reached out to Gary Vaynerchuk when he wasn't doing this stuff. Got to meet Gary, spent a lot of time with Gary. Gary really pivoted me. Gary introduced me to Tim Ferriss. Tim Ferriss introduced me to Lewis Howes when Lewis Howes was just starting out. And it just kind of sets off this chain of events if you just keep on leaning into it. And over that time, I'm like, you just got to lean into it. And the mindset shift that happens to be like, where you're like, put your foot in the cold water, like what people don't realize is all these things that are now 30-day challenges, 75 hards, Wim Hof cold water plunging, which we can talk about here if you want to. It really is just keeping on to leaning into the discomfort. And what I've realized recently in the last couple of years is we have to as entrepreneurs, we need to separate where the where the healthy discomfort is and lean in on that, because there's so many opportunities to grow, and then stray away from the unhealthy discomforts that we sometimes get distracted by.
I'm going to show you something real quick. I've never done this before, but I'm going to show you this right now. This is hilarious that you're talking about this. So I've been doing F45, right?
Yeah.
F45. So this is my picture from this morning. And if you go back on my picture on my thing, this is exactly what it says. Dues paid. What are you doing to put yourself in uncomfortable situations? Those uncomfortable places are where we grow, in all capital letters. And here you are, you just said, I'm like, this guy's either been on my Instagram page or we're supposed to be connected. And you said that, I'm like, well, I've never shown my Instagram on a podcast before, but we have to talk about the dude. And then I get on my Instagram live for our Growth Stat Drive community on our Facebook Live. And I did a post this morning, and this has been a theme of mine for a couple months. And I asked people, I said, what are you doing to put yourself in uncomfortable situations? Because that's where we grow. But we don't like to lean into uncomfortable situations because they're freaking uncomfortable. So how did you overcome that hurdle? Like, what were 2 or 3 things that helped you overcome that and you begin to lean into, and you said it, healthy, uncomfortable situations for you to grow, Neal?
Yeah, I think, what I started to realize was I had a lot of circumstances in well, actually, this is how it happened. When my 9-year-old daughter converted from being a little baby alien thing to actually having a personality, right? As parents, we all go through like, oh, it's a person now. It's not a baby anymore. I became really invested in women's empowerment. And I got to speak at Google's conference on inclusion and diversity. And I stood up there speaking about tokenism. White guy, beard, tattoos, talking to, I don't know, a couple thousand people about tokenism. And I got shunned. And I walked off that stage and I was like, this is interesting. I had this huge mindset change of understanding suddenly what people feel like when we kind of look at somebody, be like, this person must be this person must be that, right? And people, as I started to achieve success, by conventional means, people started to say things to me like, of course you're successful. You were a Marine. You guys can do anything, or you were white. You grew up privileged. and a Marine. Come on, you had this. And the mindset shift was when I would explain to people that, like, I grew up in a broken household. My parents divorced when I was little. My dad was in jail for a period of time. I didn't see him for a bunch of years. I got pistol whipped when I was a kid by police. And what I started to realize was, like, if I hadn't done all of those things that some people will call, you know, obstacles or blockages or whatever you want to call them, all it is building muscle. Every single one of those bad things. And I remember when so I had all these different micro events that happened. I remember being out of the military and working directly. I worked for the global CEO at Cushman and Wakefield. We were 16,000 employees. We were doing hundreds of millions of dollars in real estate every year. And I remember the CEO would get panicky over stuff. And I was like 3 years out of the military. And I would literally look over this guy whose net worth was hundreds of millions of dollars, and he'd be freaking out about something. And I'd look over at him, I'd be like, is anybody dying out of this? Like, because my mindset was like,
Right.
we're eating, we got roof over our heads, we don't have bullets coming down range. And so, you know, the mindset shift really for me, what happened was, and I'll bring this all together, is realizing and adopting this idea that this is a marathon, not a sprint. And that's a big one for me, to realize that, like, just because you have a slow lap around the track, you know, in this marathon, doesn't mean that, like, you can't pick up the pace, you can't kind of, you know, refuel, you can't reset. And don't get lost in the fact that, you know, if you have a bad business deal, a bad day at work, a bad month, a bad business, a bad relationship, all you're doing is strengthening muscles for the next lap around the track. And I think you would agree, like, when we see these people that are ultra successful, it's real easy and preferred for us to talk about how we got there. But it needs to be, and this is why I really am focused on this. We need to focus on the fact of, like, empowering people to realize, like, all of the failure that went on behind it, or the bad lap, but it's all a muscle that just got built.
My good friend Greg Reed and Sharon, my good friends Greg Reed and Sharon Lecter wrote a book called 3 Feet from Gold. They work with the Napoleon Hill Foundation, and in that book, I interviewed Greg on my podcast a while back. I interviewed Greg, and I said my favorite line out of the entire book was the guy who was a 21-year overnight success, and he talked about the failure, and he talked about because people don't see the process, they just see the end result. What are some of the things you do? And I know we talked about Wim Hof. We know we talked about that. What are some of the things that you do on a daily basis or a weekly basis, Neal, to be able to improve your mindset, specifically speaking of your cold stream? But what are some of the things you do, that and other things you do, to be able to strengthen yourself, to be able to lean into uncomfortableness, to be able to grow your mindset, to be able to do some of the things that you do?
Yep. No, I appreciate that. So in one of my businesses, I run these accountability groups for men mostly, right? And the acronym we use really is accountability, integrity, and habits, right? And so that's a big, huge focus. Like, in order for me to hold others accountable, operate with integrity, and to talk about habits, I need to have very clear, very good practices in place. So a big piece of the habits I have in place is one, I try to remove this is crazy too. I try to remove the things from my plate that I don't need to be worried about. A lot of times we're like, oh, I'm going to build a habit, or I'm going to build a process. And then it turns out half the stuff in your habit and half the stuff in your process is stuff you don't even want to do. There's too many of us, especially the entrepreneurs, where we think we need to do it all. Mm-hmm. And so I very much subscribe to the idea, one, get a virtual assistant, get some kind of assistant in a different country where it only costs you 10 or 12 bucks to have them do something that you just don't want to do, and take it off your plate. First thing,
you've got to be in my email, because I'm hiring 3 VAs today. So you've got everything you're saying is literally, I'm like, so anyway, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
The second one is, I think consistency, right, is so important. Like, people don't realize that, like, that's why crash diets don't work. It's why the gym doesn't work in January. So I think consistency is super important. The other important thing I've realized is having a real, understandable, and achievable goal with a purpose behind it is the make or break thing. So, and what I mean by that is, let's just say, for example, I'll make something up, right? Let's say I weigh 213 pounds, and I read some article online that the ideal weight for somebody my height is 200 pounds. And I go on this diet trying to get to 200 pounds. Clearly, I'm going to go like, all right, like up and down, up and down. And then when you don't get to that 200 pounds, what do? You get frustrated with yourself, and then it spins you in a different direction. And so I really believe that people oftentimes are not working on the right goal. And then when they don't achieve it, they get frustrated and set themselves up for failure. And we're wired to set ourselves up for failure more likely than set ourselves up for success. Versus if I said, the reason why I'm going to get down to 200 pounds is because if I take that 13 pounds off, I'm training for a marathon, or I'll be able to run quicker, or I want more energy to run around with my daughter, or whatever that thing is. The goal, like before you go even saying like, I'm going to be held accountable, I'm going to operate with integrity, or I'm going to put good habits in place, the goals are so important to make sure that they are actually the thing. Because if you're climbing the wrong mountain and you get up there, you're just going to get exhausted and wear yourself out. And I think that's what happens.
Which again is funny because here's my goals I write down twice a day in my 10X planner. One of my goals right here is Division I baseball. I umpire college baseball, and I love it. I've been doing it 4 years. I got one of my buddies in the big leagues, worked the World Series this year. Another one of my buddies in the big leagues for a long time, where he's a big D1 guy, SEC, ACC. Is D1 baseball. The one right next to that is lose 66 pounds. Now, I wrote these goals down last year because I went to D1 camp with the SEC, ACC camp, and they're like, Ken, you've got great instinct, great communicator. You work well with coaches. You got to lose some weight. So I set a goal to lose 66 pounds. The reason I wanted to lose 66 pounds was for the next goal right next to it, so I could work Division I baseball. And I would have got in last year had COVID not killed our season. But now I just crossed the 50-pound mark about 2 weeks ago. Yeah. So when you say that, I'm like, well, dude, here's one more thing that you're talking about that I'm literally fleshing out and completely understand what that looks like. So what would you say to people who have set goals, who have goals, Neal, who may not have the why behind the goal? Like, how did they come up with that why? What did you do to start coming up with those whys?
I think the why for me came really of knowing what it really felt like to show up at your best. Like, I think like for me, I had one version of what showing up at my best was, and that was in a military uniform and operating a certain way. Right. And I mastered that. And I tried to even find ways to match that for a long time. And I think exploring personal development is probably going to be like the best way to kind of like, because if we don't know where we're going, it doesn't matter if we're in the car, right? And I think that's what happens to a lot of us is like there is a lot of seduction to entrepreneurship, and everyone can be like, I want to write the book and I want to be on stage and I want to do all the things, and you can start, but if you really don't know where you're going, you're not going to get there. And exploring personal development and really understanding what it's like to operate at a peak state for you, whatever that is super important. And like I have over time figured out that like I am such a forward, slightly aggressive, leaned in person, unfiltered, and I hold space for business owners, advisors, consultants, and I'm the bridge for a lot of these conversations. And so it is so paramount to me that all the time, this kind of version of me that you're seeing right now, that I operate like this all day long. Mm-hmm. And I just because I have my baseline, right? I have my benchmark and my thresholds. Mm-hmm. And then I think a lot of times people are, again, trying to pursue something like even like meditation, or I do lots of meditation. I drink lots of water. I have my daily vitamins. I have coaches in my life. I have 3 coaches at any given time. But the goal is I know my baseline and my benchmark and know where I want to be. And in order for me to make a decision and feel like it's the right decision, that's where I know I need to be. I think there's a good tool that I use. What I've found, and I'm sure you know this just from the circles of people you interact with as well, is that the only time that what I've experienced, the only time that people hold something back is when there is uncertainty or scarcity in their life, right? And the thing is it's innate, right? Now the thing is that there's abundance, right? It's why uber rich people give shit away. It's why I started my foundation. It's like I'm living with such abundance in my life that all I want to do is give more to people. And I think that if your decisions reflect that of scarcity, then there's some work to be done. And you have to find the habits, rituals, and the accountability and the integrity to be able to operate from that place. Because again, we've seen it, right? Back before COVID, you go to a charity fundraiser and people are giving away 25, 50, $100,000 at a clip. You know, like I think we talked about this when we were on Clubhouse together, where like I'm a firm believer that I have a responsibility after doing all the crazy things that I've done. If anybody calls me and says, how do you build what should I be using for this funnel? Or what should I be using for this? Who do you know somebody who does this thing? Or how can you, I will do all of that for free. I want to give it all back. But the first time that you say energetically, like, here, let me tell you what's going on in my business and let's solve my problem. And there's that energy exchange where you want me to think and feel about your business. That's where there should be a financial transaction take place.
Mm-hmm. Hey, let me ask you a question. How long has it been since you exited out of your business?
This most recent one, we exited out in February, right before COVID.
So just recently.
Yep.
And I know you guys did very well on that one from listening to your story in the past. How similar was that from leaving the Marine Corps? You exit out of your business and then you're like, nobody needs you anymore. Everything's different. How were those similar for you?
Yes, I think, well, I think similar, and this time I knew how to deal with it better. Mm. You know, I think that's a big thing where, you know, just for the people watching this, right? We started a company and in 2 years raised $100 million and built a 135 person company. And every Monday morning, I would grab my wheelie, go into New York City, go to our headquarters office, spend the morning with doing the executive management board meeting stuff. And for 2 years, I hopped on an airplane every single Monday afternoon and flew the entire week. Made it home in time for dinner with my daughter, brought her keychains from wherever I was, and then did it again the following week. And during that time, went through a divorce as a result of it. You know, sacrificed yourself in many, many different ways, because we sacrifice ourselves for our companies we work with. And then, to your point, came out and then had this kind of identity, you know, like it's all gone. We're not doing that anymore, you know. And so I think that it is very similar. Only this time I had the muscle to manage it.
Let me ask you a question. Two things. Number one, for every entrepreneur that's out there, like the dream is, I want to start, build, and scale, and then I want to exit. And I want to exit forward. And I've got friends, Brandon Dawson, who runs Cardone Ventures with Grant. Brandon's a good friend. He sold his business for $150 some odd million. And he said for 6 weeks he laid on the floor and cried because nobody needed him anymore.
Right.
What would you say to entrepreneurs that are listening today, Neal, that have that, they just think that's the place called there? Like, what would you say to them on how would you caution them to maybe enjoy the journey and not just look forward to that exit and watching your bank account, you know, add a few commas to it?
Right. I love this. So to the person who wants to build something, scale something, and sell it, my immediate answer is no, you don't. You're lying to yourself, and you're lying to everyone else around you, because I've done a litmus test against this, because I oftentimes now am advising early stage founders, doing angel rounds of investing, solving the problem, doing all this. And my answer is, if I gave you $10 million right now in your personal bank account, would you work on this? And like 2% say yes. And those are the ones that actually matter, right? Because the crazy thing is I exited my company, and during COVID, when I really didn't have to work last year, and I just said this to people last night, I worked equally as hard as I did the year before. Like, I just wasn't on an airplane. And during COVID, I built 4 different businesses, started this foundation, started my accountability group, ran my coaching program during COVID, hosted men's retreats. And I think that, like, people have to realize that, like, when you look at the Gary Vaynerchuks of the world, the Grant Cardones of the world, I would put you and I would put me in that bucket as well. Like even though we're living in this world of abundance, it's like, no, this is what we do. We're not doing it because it's sexy. We're not doing it because it's attractive. We're not doing it because of, like, if I had $100 million in the bank account, you know what I would do? I would just buy a jet and do it. I mean, like, that would,
Right.
but
just get there. Just get there quicker.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think that, but I think that's like, it's like, but then what do you do now, right? I think that what really sets entrepreneurs off is, in a good way, is like, you find your superpower, and then you don't worry about building or scaling or the book or the thing, but really lean in on your superpower and let the rest kind of figure itself out. And that's when stuff really starts to happen.
I love it. That's amazing. Well, we're getting near the end of our time together. Let's talk about your foundation for a minute, Neal. I know you're passionate about it. The first time I heard you on Clubhouse, you were talking about it, and you said something about your sweatshirts or whatever. I went and ordered a sweatshirt immediately. I was like, let me go help this guy out. Let me go see what this guy's doing. And then literally I ordered the sweatshirt, and 2 to 3 minutes after I ordered the sweatshirt, and you said, if guys ask me on the podcast and I look and they haven't bought a sweatshirt yet, I'm not going to be on their podcast. And I'm like, yes, I bought a sweatshirt. But talk to me about your foundation and the fulfillment that comes from you being able to give back, and the responsibility you feel to be able to give back.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. The thing I've come across is, I end up coaching a lot of veterans in transition, and it's real easy for them to see, and for people who are not veterans to see, like, this group of people needs help, right? But in order for us to ask, like, to get help, we need to be able to ask for help, and a lot of times they don't know where to start. And so 4 or 5 years ago, I was working with Gallup and these big ad agencies, and we built this brand out. Went through a cool branding exercise, came up with this brand to describe Neal Conlon, and it was Press Forward. And I put it on a shelf because I was doing all this other stuff and didn't have time for it. And with COVID and the exit from the previous company, I took it off the shelf, and I said, where can I leverage all of this effort and resource that went into building this powerful brand, this idea of pressing forward. And so that's how it kind of manifested itself. And at the same time, what people don't realize is, like, our military, we think about what's going on for COVID for the military, or COVID for us, but not for COVID for the military. You got all these people transitioning out that probably can't get jobs. Don't understand what's like a transition. People going into the military during COVID. Think about that one's has to be crazy. And so I really wanted to figure out how to do that. And so I built this foundation out, got a really good supplier on a lot of my materials, and made it and building into kind of this, for anyone who is familiar with, like, the Paul Newman kind of approach to it, where it's like, when we sell these products and produce them, once the operation pays for itself, I have no reason to make any money off of this. I'll make money off the other stuff. So almost 100% of all the proceeds goes to veterans in transition programs, men's mental health awareness programs, and men in crisis. Because if you look at it, and I know it's a little bit long-winded, but if you look at the boys that are unfortunately taking guns to school, the suicide rates of veterans, and the overall kind of challenges that happen in the world right now, a lot of it is driven by men that are veterans, and it's a cry for help, and we need to help them.
I love that, man. Well, Neal, man, dude, I'm honored, number one, that you took your time out to spend some time with us today. I'm super excited, man. Every now and then you meet somebody and you're like, dude, man, we just have the same DNA. And I don't know how much more clear that could be for me than just even your 2 or 3, topics and subjects you talked about today, dude. I'm excited for you. I'm excited for and honored for the people that you're able to help. And I've got 4 daughters. My oldest just got married a couple of weeks ago and turned 25 yesterday. So I'm feeling a little bit old today. But anyway, dude, I appreciate a ton. I am honored that you took some time out to spend with us and our audience today. And any last words or any last advice you'd want to leave our audience today?
First, thank you for doing this. This is amazing. And congratulations on your daughter. That's a big win in dad's role. So good job, man, on that one.
I appreciate that.
Just the thing that keeps on coming up for me, that I keep on sharing with everybody constantly is we need to remind each other that we're doing a good job. And I always like, you want a mantra, you want a secret sauce, you want a trick, you want a formula. It really is. Everybody is doing a good job. They show up every day. They're doing the best job they can, and good job.
I love it. Yeah, I'm a constant encourager, and I tell people, I ask people all the time, are you a thermostat or are you a thermometer? When you walk into a room of people, do you gauge the temperature, or are you a thermostat where you can literally walk into a room and change the temperature of a room because you're such an encourager, because as passionate leaders are intentional in adding value. And when the word encourage means to literally add courage to. So, man, when I speak with people, I'm adding courage. And I say this a lot. If you don't have courage, borrow some of mine. If you don't have belief in what you're doing, borrow some of mine. And I see that in you. And that's why you're making the difference that you're making, my friend.
Love that. That's good. I might borrow that from you.
Steal it. The first time you have to give me credit. The second time you can say, I've heard it. First time you have to say, yeah, I heard my buddy Ken Joslin say. The second time you say, I've heard it said, and then this is John Maxwell I heard say this. And the third time you say, I've always said, and then you just use the quote. Well, Neal, thank you, my friend, for being a part of our Grow Stack Drive podcast today, man. Honored again for you for spending some time with us today, my friend.
Thank you for doing this. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Hey, guys, thank you for being a part of our Grow Stack Drive podcast. We will be back tomorrow with another special guest. And again, honored that you chose to spend time with us learning about mindset, strategy, and leadership development. Thanks. Bro, crushed it, homie.
Thanks. That was great.